Well, we're going to be looking at Paul's life as we have, because we're in the book of Acts, and a good part of the book of Acts covers the life and the ministry, I should say, of Paul, not so much the life. Now, I mentioned 3 facts about Paul last week. We're in chapter 25, 26 of the book of Acts, and I said his age is he has been a Christian for about this many years at this point, and he has had active ministry for about this many years. Do you remember what those 3 numbers were? Paul is about age 54. He's been a Christian for 25 years, and he's been in active ministry, 3 or 4 missionary journeys for about 12 years. So I just want to, I mentioned that just to bring a little bit of perspective and the reminder that we're not reading about some imaginary figure, fantasy figure, but Paul was a real man and relatively young. He's not going to, by our standards at least, of course, Jesus only lived to age 33, but he doesn't have a lot of life after this point. So at this point, when we pick up at the end of chapter 25 in the book of Acts and go into 26, Paul is on his last missionary journey because it's going to end in Rome, and the book of Acts is going to end, and it is presumed that he was executed in Rome. We never hear anything more after that from Paul, and that's, as I just said, where the book of Acts ends. But at this point, so he's kind of leading up to getting to Rome. And the way that has happened is that the Holy Spirit, he says in Acts chapter 20, has made it very clear to him that wherever he goes, he's going to suffer, and that he needs to go to Jerusalem at this point. Now, he knows that there are a significant number of Jews who are gunning for him, who want to kill him. Apparently, the spread of Christianity, he's identified as being significant in that, as a significant character, and they're looking for him. And so other Christians, particularly, let's say in Ephesus, are begging Paul to not go to Jerusalem. That's like going into the hornet's nest. They're surely going to kill you. And that's where Paul says, well, nothing in my life is more important than my service to Jesus Christ. In the one chorus we were singing, and I want you to remember this, if we went back and we stepped through all of the words that we have just sung in the hymns and the choruses, what a feast that would be for your soul. But we sing them so quickly. But in the one chorus we sang, we said, Jesus is my Redeemer, my greatest treasure, the wellspring of my soul. And I think to myself, is that true? When others see my life, would they say, I can see in the way he lives, the things he says, the values he has, the way he lives his life, that his greatest treasure is Jesus Christ. And that Jesus Christ is the wellspring of his soul. That's, I think, what you see in Paul when he says, there is nothing more important to me than serving Jesus Christ. He would say, he is my greatest treasure. He is the wellspring of my soul. And I see that in his life. So he goes to Jerusalem, and just as prophesied, just as expected, he is arrested. Well, he is come upon by a mob of Jews, and he's able to function there a little bit at first, but then a group of Jews come from Asia, we're told, and they're going to kill Paul. They start this riot, and as a result of the Roman law and the fact that he's a Roman citizen, his life is saved. And then he goes on trial. I'm really going to abbreviate this, but then he goes on trial. And it's really not that the Romans want to want to prosecute Paul or execute Paul or stop Paul. It's more that the Jewish contingent in Jerusalem, where the Romans are now an occupying force, are all riled up about this guy and about Christianity. And so the Roman hierarchy, the Roman government in that area is just like trying to keep things under control. So Paul is arrested by the Roman government for his own safety and to kind of control things from getting out of hand. There is in the Roman Empire at this point an amazing rule of law. Is it? No. I won't try to fool around with the Latin. I was going to say Pax Romana, which is a reference, I think, to the fact that at Rome at this point is over a good part of the populated world, and have brought this legal system and government and society to a good part of the world. You hear about the Roman roads and the fact that Jesus came at this point, and the development of the Roman Empire enabled Paul to do the kind of traveling he did in spreading the gospel. So it's just interesting here, how God is working through seemingly what we might call like secular means. So he goes on trial. Paul goes on trial before first this governor of the area named Felix. Paul is taken from Jerusalem to Caesarea, and Felix is there, and Felix is just, like I said, they're just trying to figure out what's going on and how to kind of resolve this situation. So the Jews are screaming for Paul, we want him, just turn him over to us, we'll kill him. They even have a plot to murder Paul, try to get Felix to take Paul from Caesarea back to Jerusalem, and when he does that, then they'll intercept him on the way and kill Paul. And Felix is kind of aware of this, and he's kind of intrigued a little bit by Paul. We're told that he's hoping to get a bribe from Paul. And remember, as I said, Paul is kind of under a house arrest for his own protection, so he's under this house arrest with Felix for at least 2 years, a couple of years. And so then Felix is, his successor comes in, a guy named Festus, and Festus is left to deal with this Paul issue, which is still on the plate there. And the Jews are still clamoring for Paul and trying to get now Festus to move Paul back to Jerusalem to go on trial there. But again, Paul and others are aware that's just a ruse. They're going to try and intercept Paul along the way and kill him. But Festus kind of wants to do a favor for the Jews, and so he's thinking about this. And in the process, then, Paul appeals to Caesar. And Felix, and then this gets passed on to Festus. So he's going to go to Rome. So it's at the beginning of Festus's governorship, and we're told that this King Agrippa and his wife Bernice come to kind of like pay respects to the new governor, who is Festus. Now both Festus, this is interesting, both Festus and Agrippa, we're told, are familiar with the Jewish religion. They were familiar with their customs and some of the issues that are going on within Judaism. And one of course, is regarding this Nazarene sect, or referred to as the Way also, which is Jesus. So now Agrippa comes and he says to Festus, hey, I would like to hear this guy. I would like to hear Paul, what he has to say. Festus says, well, that works for me because I'm supposed to send him on to Rome for trial before Caesar, and I really don't know what to put on the indictment. I can't really figure out what he's accused of. A lot of it just seems like internal religious or doctrinal squabbles between the Jews. Paul's not breaking any Roman law that I can see. So I don't really know what to do with this mess. I don't want to just, obviously, if I just turn him over to the Jews, they're going to just murder him. On the other hand, I don't know what to send him to Rome with. So great, Agrippa, you want to meet with him? Let's meet with him. You listen to him. Maybe you can help figure this thing out, how I'm going to resolve this issue. So if you try to put yourself in Paul's position, you're on trial for your life. But now remember, it's the great apostle Paul, a man mighty in spirit, a man who's suffered many things. How would you expect, what would you say in this as a presenter with an audience of Agrippa and Festus and some others, Bernice? What would you say? Your life is on trial. What would you expect Paul to say? Well, if I was writing a book like, Great Christians, I would say then Paul got up in front of Agrippa and Festus and said maybe like Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I will not bow to you. Jesus is King of kings and Lord of lords. And you're going to stand in judgment on him, his judgment. You'll face it. And then he, he had spiritual power or angels appeared. We just sang that story. The God of angel armies is always by my side. And so then after he said that, Agrippa and Festus, their loins were loosed and they fell on their faces and angels appeared. A big, 1,000 angels with spears and Paul walked out right in the middle of them, ushered out by an army of angels. How about that? How's that sound? That sounds pretty good to me. Well, here's what Paul says. First of all, again, I'm not going to cover all of it this morning, but we've read some of it already. But I want to encourage you to do this and to think about that. So what is Paul saying here? Now, I think part of what he says is understandable, perhaps expected. So he starts off talking to them and he says basically to Agrippa and Festus and the others, he says, I am a devout Jew. So they're accusing me of attacking Judaism. I am a devout Jew. I had been raised in the strictest sense. I was like a minister. I was a rabbi. I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. So I understand them, and I am not trying to destroy Judaism. I'm not opposed to Judaism. I am a devout Jew. Then he goes on and he says, and not only that, but because of my zeal for God and for the Jewish faith and the purity and the honor and glory of God, when this sect following this Jesus character and claims were made that he is the Messiah, I myself was the number one persecutor of these people. I wasn't content to just sit around in Jerusalem and throw a few rocks or yell a few things or be part of a mob. No, I am going to be a leader in persecuting these Christians and destroying this sect, this blasphemy against Jehovah. And so he tells about how that's what I did. And in fact, as we'll just see where we pick up reading, then he goes on to say, and in fact, I was on a mission to Damascus with the endorsement of all these priests now who want to kill me, having their endorsement to go and persecute Christians, to go find Christians and bring them back to Jerusalem, just like these guys are trying to do to me. So I am an insider. I am one of them. So what begs the question now is, so what happened? How do we get from A to B? Jew, persecutor of Christians, and now promoter of Christianity. How do we get there? And that's what Paul picks up with. He talks about his miraculous conversion. Now, as we read some of this, and we'll look more closely at it as we go on, and I just want to point out here, normally, I try to do what is called exegetical preaching. That's a theological term for, what does the text say? You exegete it. You cut it open and say, this is the point. This is what's being said here. That's exegesis. And then if you read things into the text, that's called eisegesis. So normally I try to exegete the scriptures. An alternative to that is to do topical preaching. That is where you preach a series on the Holy Spirit, or the church, or the gifts, or whatever. You do a series of messages. So that's kind of like presenting a Bible study about a given topic. I think exegetical preaching is important because you're supposed to be allowing the text to speak for itself. You're supposed to be allowing God to emphasize what he wants to emphasize rather than, let's say, what I want to emphasize, I think is important. So I'm not being totally critical. In fact, what I'm telling you is I'm about to engage in more topical preaching. I'm going to engage in looking at what Paul's life, what happened to Paul and his relationship with Jesus Christ, and say, how does that relate to me? Now, that is not the point of this passage, but it's something that's very important to me, and we see in this passage. So he talks about his miraculous conversion, how he got from persecutor of Christians to promoter of Christians. Like, what went on? So I want you to think about what he says and how he says things here. It just comes across as very matter of fact. Now, I know it is through the lens of Luke, who recorded this for us in Acts, but that's what we have. And so here's Paul describing before these government officials, if you want it, very sophisticated people, and he's going to talk about some amazing things. And he talks about them not as if they were weird or strange, but just as matter of fact, as if you described any other process or something. When someone said, how did you get from bed this morning to come to church, to sitting in the pew now? And you say, well, first I got up out of the bed, then I changed my clothes, then I washed my face, then I shaved, then I ate breakfast, as matter of fact as that, as real as that, he describes what happens between him and God and this conversion, which we'll talk about then, which is, again, as I'm trying to portray to you, quite amazing and unexpected, I think. So let me pick up the text and read for you verses 12 through 18. We're going to focus on verses, really, the second part of 15 and 16. But in the next couple of weeks, we'll go back and look at some of the other things he said. So we're picking up a little bit in the middle of his discourse. As I said to you already, he's talked about how he was a devout Jew, a strict Jew, then about how he persecuted Christians, and now about his conversion. So one day, as I was on such a mission to Damascus, armed with the authority and commission of the leading priest, which is what I just said, right? He's on a mission to go persecute Christians. About noon, Your Majesty, as I was on the road, a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shone down on me and my companions. We all fell down, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will." Is that something you would expect Jesus would say? God would speak from heaven? It seems rather maybe harsh. It seems rather unimpressive. It seems so common. Have you ever, if you've heard about the gift of speaking in tongues, have you ever been in a situation where that gift was used? Have you ever been in the gift of prophecy, for example? Have you ever been in a situation where someone exercised what they said was the gift of prophecy? Speaking just for myself, when I have been in situations where people have seemingly spoken in tongues, and because I've been in situations where people seemingly spoke in tongues, at least they were like babbling incoherently, at least incoherently to me. Maybe they were speaking in Swahili, but it didn't sound like it. It just sounded like they were babbling. But in some situations I've been in like that, in large groups, or there's no interpretation. Everybody just goes, "Oh, wow, that was really cool." "Oh, I feel, I've got goosebumps. The Spirit must be here." Okay. But it seems like Paul is very clear that if God gives you like the gift of tongues in a public gathering, then there should be also the gift of interpretation where somebody interprets that. And so when I've been in situations where there was then seemingly this interpretation, because someone would speak in tongues and then everybody would sit and wait and it'd just be quiet. And in this one church service I was in, the pastor appropriately said, "Well, we're just going to wait for the interpretation, for God to give somebody the interpretation of that." So when I've had these interpretations, or when someone has said, "I have the gift of prophecy, here's the word of God for you, this is a word from the Lord to you," or whatever, it has always been things like, "God loves us. God is pleased with us." And if it's more of a prophetic thing, it's something like, "There's a woman here who is unable to get pregnant, and God has said that she's going to have a baby. There's somebody here who's got back problems, and God is going to heal those back problems." So that's just my experience. I'm not saying that's... But so when I come to this, and the Lord doesn't say, "Paul, you have back problems, I'm going to heal those." And he doesn't say, "I love you and have a wonderful plan for your life," or "You're not married, you're going to get married and your wife's going to have a baby," or whatever else. He says this. This is what the Lord says. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will." Now that's not all he says. But Paul doesn't recognize this as... He says "Lord," and our text has a lowercase l, but he doesn't recognize this as Jesus. So it's interesting if you put together Paul's accounts of this interaction with Jesus, he asks two questions. Who are you and what do you want me to do? Who are you and what do you want me to do? And there's been a lot of messages on those two questions. It's interesting when you become a Christian. Are those the two questions? Who are you and what do you want me to do? So he asks, who are you, Lord? And the Lord replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Again, emphasizes that Paul is doing the persecuting, and it is not my children who you are persecuting, it is me who you are persecuting. He goes on, and this is what Jesus says to Paul. Now get on your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and witness. Tell people that you have seen me and tell them what I will show you in the future, and I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Now remember, Paul is hearing this, right? The Lord is speaking to him, but here he's giving this account to Agrippa and to Festus. This is what the Lord has said to me. I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Yes, I am sending you to the Gentiles to open their eyes. Now remember, who is Paul talking to? He's talking to Gentiles. Agrippa, Festus, Bernice. This is an internal Jewish squabble. No Roman laws are being broken here, and none they can discern. Now Paul is saying, this is what the Lord said to me. Go to the Gentiles. So that's who's listening, the Gentiles. Yes, I'm sending you to the Gentiles to open their eyes, so they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. One other pause here. I'm sorry I'm making all these pauses, but this would be mind-blowing. Because what is the relationship that Jews have with Gentiles at this time? None. None. Paul is being defiled just by being in the presence of these Gentiles. There is no evangelistic effort from the Jews to win the Romans. You're born a Jew. That's the only way in, virtually. And they have nothing to do with Gentiles. So Paul now to say, the message, the ministry is to Gentiles, is not only incredible, but one of the things that is so disgusting and distasteful and deserves death according to his Jewish brothers and sisters who want to kill Paul. And you know, in a previous speech, when he's interacting, it's when he says, and God has told me to go to the Gentiles, that then the Jews go, kill him! We don't need to hear anything more. Kill the guy. So here he says to Agrippa and these Gentiles, no, God told me to go to the Gentiles. Sending you to the Gentiles to open their eyes so they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. Then they will receive forgiveness for their sins and be given a place among God's people who are set apart by faith in me. Also notice that he speaks, in a disconnected way. He's not personalizing it. He's not saying to the Gentiles, like you, Agrippa and Festus, God is reaching out to you. What will you do with this message? How will you respond? Remember Peter's preaching in the beginning of the book of Acts? It's much more pointed. When the Jews who he's preaching to say, what must we do to be saved? And Peter in his message is saying, you killed him. You better look out. Judgment is coming. Very personalized and pointed. But not Paul here. He talks about as if the Gentiles were some foreign group. Okay, so let me take you back to verses 15 and 16, where we read this. And the Lord replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get to your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and witness. Now here is where we go, we deviate a little bit here and ask this question, or at least I ask this question, and this is something that I want to talk about. I get, last night I was just thinking about this, saying, man, I am so excited. So I look at this and say, is this true of me? What happened to Paul, is this true of me? Is this true of you? Has Jesus appeared to me? Has he appeared to you? Has he therefore then appointed you as a servant and a witness? So the question is what was true of Paul true for you? Is what was true of Paul, appeared, appoint, servant, witness, is that true just of Paul? Or is that true of all disciples? Is that true of you? Now let me just pause here for a minute, and we're going to develop this. But let me ask you this point. Do you want it to be true of you? Do you want it to be true? Or do we prefer to think of Paul, do I prefer to think of Paul as, well, he was unique. Obviously, he was different. He is Saint Paul. And there are rare exceptions throughout the history of the church and Christianity, where there are these super people, super saints. But most of us aren't. I'm not. That could be a kind of humility, a kind of realistic assessment, you might say, of one's life, the strength of one's Christianity, but it can also be, and I find this is more often the case, an excuse for spiritual laziness and spiritual deadness. I really don't want to be like Paul. I really don't want that kind of relationship with God. I prefer to be just the way I am. I'm comfortable with my Christianity. I'm comfortable with right where I have him. I would not want to be like this. So going in, that's a problem. As they start to talk about this, I mean, maybe it will whet your appetite. Or my appetite. That's, how the Spirit works. But I can think of, for a good part of my life, where if I was sitting listening to this, I would be thinking to myself, I don't want to be like that. I don't care to be like that. Paul was, in my opinion, a fanatic, a kook. I mean, he did, great things, and, God bless people like that, but that's not for me. So I'm going to ask that question, though. I say, God, I want to be like that. How does this apply to me? One question that I think God spoke to me about a long time ago is this. God saying to me, Dave, you can have all of me that you want. You can have all of me that you want. And therefore, what you have of me is only what you want. If my relationship with Jesus is lacking, the problem is not with him. The problem is not him withholding. I have everything that I want. The problem is I don't want much. Okay, so Let's think about this a little bit. So what were those four words? I'll try. Appeared, appoint, servant, and witness. Appear, appoint, servant, and witness. Okay, so I have appeared to you. Now, we commonly use this kind of, I'm sure you've been asked, or you asked this question, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? We just were singing about it. I just mentioned that in one of the choruses we sang, right? We said, He's my greatest treasure. He's the wellspring of my soul. And we sang very emotionally about how close and real and personal Jesus is. We just listened to special music. My Jesus, I love thee. I know thou art mine. For thee all the follies of sin I resign. I was thinking of this morning, I had mentioned the hymn, this old, I'm going to use this critical, sappy hymn, I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, whatever. He walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me I am his own. And the voice I hear ringing in my ear, none other has ever known. Yeah. See how, so personal, right? He walks with me. But what does a personal relationship with Christ look like? Well, I think we might use this term personal, but I find that for many people, it's not a personal relationship, it's a doctrinal relationship. And what's most important is getting the Bible right, finding life in the Bible, having my doctrine right. What church do you go to? Wanting to talk about theological things. And their relationship is more doctrinal than it is really personal. They're known for having right doctrine. That's what's most important to them. Believing the right things, knowing the Bible, memorizing the Bible, reciting the Bible, having their devotions. So maybe that's going a little bit into the next one. We have more of a religious relationship with Jesus. We do certain rituals. We were raised as Christians and we feel comfortable with people looking like this and wearing certain things, and this is how church should be done. And I love to go to church, and I love the good old hymns, and I love the people or the fellowship, and it's not really a personal relationship with Jesus. It's more of a relationship with religion, or moralistic. When I hear people, we go to the Bible, it teaches us morals, how to live, how to do family life, how to raise children, how to act in the workplace, 5 steps to that, 4 principles to that, or how to behave in society. What does the Bible say about racism and sexism, and what about political parties, and who should we back? And it seems like that's what more your relationship with is. And again, if you sat down and you look at the things that I talk about and the things that are important to me and how I interact with people and what I spend my time on, and look at my checkbook or where money is spent, when I don't want to pick on one of these, but let's just say, when I interact with somebody and all they can talk about is COVID, or all they can talk about is the New York Yankees, it seems like, or all they can talk about is politics, what does that say to me? That's what's most important to them. Oh, politics are. That's what's most important. They say they're a Christian. Oh, and I don't deny that. But it doesn't seem to me that Jesus is what is most important to them. It seems like politics is what's most important to them. Oh, but Christian, and what would Jesus? And okay, but less of a personal relationship with him and more of a political platform or a set of morals or a way of life or rules of principles of living. Or perhaps he's more of an imaginary character, like I have this teddy bear. His name is Jesus. And when I go into my bedroom, I talk with him and he comforts me and he's very real to me. But he's pretty much just in my little world and helping me and comforting me. And then when I talk with other people or when I go out of my bedroom, then my teddy bear's not with me. But sometimes when I drive in the car or whatever, I talk to my imaginary friend. But you see, he's just kind of removed from real life. And here's a little soapbox thing that you really need to think about when you talk with people. Because when you get into a conversation with people, a little bit more than just casual, all of a sudden ground rules are laid. And one of the biggest ground rules, if you're ever going to talk about or think about God, is the carpet is laid, the foundation is laid, that first of all, we are going to understand that God is not real. That's a given before we start talking. And many of us who know that God is real, we give into that. Okay, we'll accept that ground rule. And then the way that under that ground rule, that I start talking about God, that I start talking about Jesus, that I interact, that other person is in control, and I always have to couch all of my language in, well, this is for me. Well, this is what I believe. Well, this is what has worked for me. Well, this is what I think about Jesus. This is my opinion. And I talk about Jesus as he's nothing other than my imaginary teddy bear. And they use what's used against me is, I don't believe in God. That's what you believe. And I go, oh, okay, well, you really should. And then I continue to talk as if that's fact. That's true. Instead of, listen, you can deny that God exists, but let's be clear, he does exist. That's the foundation. He is real. That's the foundation that the Bible comes to us with. It doesn't try to prove God. God does exist. The question is, how will you respond to God? You can deny him, but let's be very clear. He doesn't cease to exist just because you say, oh, I don't believe in him. And nor is he deformed or fashioned based on my whims or what I think. So, sorry about that, but that is something that is just very pervasive. You need to be thinking about that and how culture affects us, because that is I was just saying, there is a dominant disconnect between the biblical view of life and the world that we swim in. Remember, in a biblical, God is the ultimate reality. God is the ultimate fact. God does exist. And the rest of the Bible, the rest of the revelation is, how do you respond to him? He doesn't cease to exist. That's a whole other aside there. I'm sorry. But so based on that, so if we think of our relationship, is it more doctrinal? Is it religious? Is it moralistic? Is it imaginary? But look at what Paul's encounter with Jesus Christ. You just see a reality to it. You see, he talks before Agrippa and Festus, God exists. What happened to me was not some like weird esoteric dream, like I was on drugs or something. And I had this psychedelic, vision. He talks about it in very down-to-earth terms. Not this mystical whatever. It's just matter of fact. I want to, again, if you read some of these things, you think of like Joan of Arc, who had this mystical vision, right? Which then defined her life. But it's very esoteric, right? It's very ethereal, and like, if you've ever seen that famous painting of her at the Met, with her looking up to heaven, it's just an incredible painting. It's really beautiful. But she has this just starry-eyed look, and she has this vision. When I think of other supposed, prophets and things, often that their encounters with God, their visions come across as mystical, and it's almost that's better. This is you have to have this secret wisdom and knowledge to understand this. But not Paul. Paul's just like this is what happened. This light shone, came down, blinded me, knocked me off the horse. There was this voice from heaven. I said, what the heck is going on? And he said, I'm Jesus, who you're persecuting. And this is what I want you to do. And it's interesting in the text, you didn't read, but a little bit farther down, he says to Agrippa, I'm simply obeying what I've been told to do. So the way he talks about, and the fact that he's willing to suffer and die for it. Now, again, people have weird visions or whatever, and might be of God, might not, and they might be willing to die for it. But it is notable that Paul is. He spent 12 years in active ministry, suffering the whole way. And he himself in 1 Corinthians 15 says, if this is just made up, if I just had some weird mystical dream, then we're really idiots for following this. There's no resurrection of Jesus. It's all made up. But you can see that he has this real encounter, and it's life transforming for Paul. Now, this is one thing that's interesting here is, if you had some, and maybe you have. I remember, I'm making this up now. I remember when I was 16 or 15 or something, I was dating this girl and she dumped me, and I was so despondent. I thought, I'm going to kill myself. And I was out in this farm field and I was about to kill myself or something. And all of a sudden, a light came and God spoke to me and said, don't do that, and follow me or something, or just, I love you. And she was not right for you anyways. Oh, and ever since that encounter I had now 37 years ago, it's changed my life. But you see, Paul is not saying that here. It's not a mystical encounter that he had with Jesus 12 years ago or 25 years ago when he became a Christian. That was just the introduction to Jesus, who is a real and alive. It wasn't just a mystical experience. It was meeting Jesus. And that's why in his letter to the Philippians, he says, I became a Christian. I had this encounter with Jesus Christ. And I knew that my sins were forgiven and his righteousness is my righteousness, and I entered into this relationship with him. And now what is my passion? What is my passion, he says. And he says this, I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. I want to suffer with him, sharing in his death, so that one way or another I will experience the resurrection from the dead. You see that? Experiential. It would be like if, I was introduced to my wife on Monday. And then I was told you're going to have an arranged marriage with her. And so, okay, I need to get married or whatever. Here's the arranged marriage. And she looks attractive to me. Okay, we'll go with this. And then on Wednesday, we have the ceremony and we get married. And I say, that was really great. You look really beautiful. I'm so happy. We had a big party, I'll see you. And then the rest of my life, I just say, I remember back to when I first met Amy, and then we got married, and we had this big party, and it was so much fun, and it's still influencing my life today. Well, hello. It wasn't about meeting her. It wasn't about a ceremony. It wasn't about a special occasion. It's about living with her, a relationship with her. But when people talk about Christianity, that's what it sounds like. Oh, somebody told me I was lost going to hell or whatever. I need Jesus to help me with this or that. So I was introduced. It seemed like he might work for me. So I prayed to receive him as my Savior. We had the wedding. And now I look back on that and that was really special to me, and that really did something for me. But when they read the Bible, when they pray, he might as well be, there's no relationship there. But you see, Paul is very different. It wasn't just a mystical experience. It was like the entering into a true relationship. This guy, Jesus, is real. He's alive. He talked to me, and he wants to continue to talk to me and use me. That's the kind of personal relation he has. Now, we'll stop because I've gone long enough, although I have like a bunch of other points here. So I'll probably finish it next week, but maybe we'll move on. So let's just stop here. And remember what I said to you at the beginning? I said, do you want that? Would you want that? What do you want from God? Remember I said, God said to me, you can have all of God that you want. And what you have is exactly what you want. So when you hear about Paul, when we read about Paul and say, Jesus, I want that kind of relationship with you. I don't want a doctrinal relationship. I don't want a religious relationship with you. I don't want a moralistic relationship with you. I don't want an imaginary relationship with you. I want to know you and live with you and fellowship with you as a person does with a person. That's what I want. And what I want to tell you is, again, God comes to us and says, which he must. If he doesn't come, we cannot go to him. He comes to us and says, just like the beautiful picture in Revelation, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Open the door. And if you open the door, I will come in and be real to you. I will eat with you and sit down with you and live with you, dwell with you. And that in Revelation chapter, that's written to who? That's written to the church. That's not written to non-believers. For years I used that verse with non-believers. And there's an element of truth to it, but it's not written to non-believers. It's written to the church. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. That's where I say, man, God, that's what I want. That's what I want.